Bueno, gracias a todos, gracias a los que nos han acompañado casi todo el día. Estamos llegando a la recta final de nuestro evento. Esta es una de las partes que desde que se planeó el evento y estuvimos viendo cuál era el ritmo y cuál era lo que queríamos terminar era con esto, porque durante todo el día les estamos dando mucha información, muchas preguntas, y este es el momento que ustedes nos devuelvan un poco de qué es lo que se quieren llevar de aquí, tratar de platicar un poquito sobre las cosas que tal vez dejamos fuera y retomar puntos críticos que ustedes piensan que pueden afectar en sus organizaciones. Entonces, me voy a pasar tantito inglés si quieren ponerme la traducción simultánea para que, digo, la gran mayoría de ustedes habla mejor inglés que yo, pero ready. Peru, no. Okay. So guys, thank you for your time. It's been an amazing day. I think we all have enjoyed your talks. We're really excited to have you in Mexico, being down here and sharing all this information that you have like firsthand, being in San Francisco where everything happens, it seems. I wanted to start with one question that I think for me is important after everything we laid out today. What's the most dangerous decision that a CEO can take in the next 12 months?
Oh, I'm gonna go first. All right. Yeah. I mean, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do think that the most dangerous decision would be like laying off all of your developers. And I feel like this is something that you're seeing in the news where they're like, Spotify recently came out with something that was like, our engineers don't code anymore. Like, we don't need the dev department. And I think that that is incredibly dangerous because not only are you going to need to go through the process of rehiring to fix all of the things that have come up, but you also now need to rebuild your team and your culture and reinstitute this sense of psychological safety so that your dev team isn't constantly being like, well, I'm going to be one part of my time scrolling on LinkedIn and looking for other jobs somewhere, and the other part of my time, like, I don't really care because the data that I'm doing is training an agent to take over my role. So I think that to be careful about promises and layoffs and decisions like that, waiting and seeing how the next 12 months will play out in the agentic space feels like the smartest thing, maybe like not dangerous, but the smartest thing that you could do.
Check. I could not have said it better.
What that guy said.
Let's jump right into it, Javier, because we talked about, I mean, I was amazed with your talk, but how about robots? How far are we? Where are you currently working? How do you see it coming on? What's the next year look like for you?
For me, lots of different projects specifically about robots. But I think the country to pay attention the most to is with China and where their successes and failures are currently. So we'll start at the robots that work relatively well. Most of the robots that work relatively well are ones that are in hotels. They have these hotel robots where your delivery person takes the food to the robot then wheels itself to your room, and you press a button, and it releases your food to you, and then it goes back downstairs for the next order. This type of robot is one that is not necessarily the most high-fidelity robot. It has a full understanding of the full map of the full hotel. It knows where every single room is. It knows how to get there. It knows why. And everything is pre-recorded and pre-planned. These are things of like, how do I get people to, one, like trust that robots can work, but then two, where do I make robots the most successful? And that's where I've seen the initial versions of success. However, there are some of my friends who are working on more complex things, and it's really difficult to do. So the problem set is if you had a person who is a package carrier in a factory and they live in a freezer where they have to keep all the food cold, can you replace them? It's because most people don't want to be in a freezer. And it turns out that if you wanted to train a robot to do that automatically, it's almost impossible. It is much better to teleoperate the robot and charge the factory $20 for having the robot, and then pay someone $2 to operate the robot an hour. Now, that is exploitive, and you're collecting you're collecting data, but these problems of what environments do robots succeed in is where we currently are, and then where do we want robots to go is where we want to be, but the middle ground is basically humans in the loop, either physically doing, like wearing a virtual reality headset and like doing the work to eventually train that robot to do that job, but there's no telling how long it'll take to imitate the success of the human. But much of what's being done now is either we'll get a neural network model that is like the large language model, that it does all the things you want it to do, such as sentence structure and code, but we don't have that same thing for robots just yet. And before then, we'll probably just be relying on people to operate them. So that's where I predict they'll be going.
Do you think we'll be in a timeline where robots figure out how to navigate strange scenarios, or where people adapt the world for robots? Right, so like hotels have elevators, they have phones in every hotel room. So that delivery robot, like they could have designed the robot to knock on the door. That would have been a difficult, like, figure out the height and do all of this. But instead they just said like, okay, if you're outside the door, call the room and then it's there. So hotels already have that infrastructure. But for a laundry folding robot, laundromats currently are quite difficult to like open the door. They can do folding, but opening the door is a whole other set. Do you think that we'll see, is it easier, or we'll see a timeline where laundromats get redesigned for the robot rather than robots learning tasks to navigate a more human world?
So as of 2 days ago, Physical AI put out a new paper that I showed you. I wish we had the video examples of them, because it doesn't really help to like talk about the examples without being able to see what the capabilities are. But you'll see a robot that has been trained to fold a shirt, and then you'll have comments on how good or bad that shirt folding was, which means that it's not there yet. And not only is that a sort of sore point, the second sore point is that the speed of this robot is extraordinarily slow. They play the video in 4x speed, so that you can think that the shirt is being folded, and reasonably well. But I'm under the impression. Sorry, the question again.
Just like, do we, the robot folding shirt, I would love.
Sorry, changing the world for the robot. I think that's really difficult to do. So think about it like this. So the PhD means doctorate in philosophy, which, like, I'm a scientist and an engineer. So what is my philosophy? But I'll just take through the logic of like what a philosophy is. A philosophy that we all agree on is that wheels are better than legs.
Wheels are better than legs.
I don't know why we agree with that. It's something that just happens to work for vehicles. But let's say that you agree that wheels are faster than legs, but they're only faster than legs if you have roads. So then you build a whole world around, to make the roads better, and that helps people to drive. But that's a extraordinarily large infrastructural take on for people to do. So in the case, for driving, you need wheels. But if at some point an engineer who just has lots of money and time would want to make a legged vehicle, they don't have to make new roads. They could just use the things that they have. And so I'm under the impression that because of how expensive it is to change things from being human-centered, given the wheel example, that it might be expensive to do such a thing.
No robot-centered worlds, just quite yet. Not quite there.
One last thing about that is also the philosophy of NVIDIA. NVIDIA has a robot department that is currently building all of their tools and all of their things that are improving based on the data that they already have, which is all human-centric. And it's a computer science way of viewing problems, but they're just going where the data is. And so I think that once they solve the human-centric things, it might be easier to have like task-specific robots that don't rely on the world the same way that humans do.
Well, I have this question about the public narrative about AI. We hear it all the time. First of all, and I don't know if we're going to go to the AGI definition, but it's everywhere. Artificial general intelligence, what does it mean? But I think there is a disconnect of we solve code, we solve this, we solve that, and as you use the tools, you figure out there's not solved. It still has ways to go. What do you see? Where you guys see the biggest disconnect?
I think this really much depends on what your day-to-day is, because that's where you're going to experience the most disconnect. And so I would imagine that the folks in this room who use AI are going to feel like that is where the biggest disconnect is, because you're faced with, I was promised this thing and I bought it, and now it's not doing what I was promised it would do. So I think it's your own experience. But for me, it's two things. The first one is what I do a lot of day to day is brand and design, whether that's UI or screens or packaging. And it can't do things like generate me an ad and video that conveys a certain feeling, because the area of psychology and creating emotions is an area that I think agents don't quite understand. You could ask, or just AI in general, you could ask an AI like, give me a color palette that is good for a soda pop company, and it'll give you some color palette, maybe it works. But then as a human, you look at that color palette and you're like, this is a terrible color palette, like this is just ugly, what did you do? And what it did was it took color palettes of other soda pops and said like, well, Coca-Cola's red, Pepsi's blue, and Poppy is like pastel, so like let me just mix all of these three together. But it doesn't really understand how to create something that is incredibly new. And so perhaps regardless of industry, to me the gap is, if you are in the business of creating new things, or you are in the business of trying to innovate on your existing industry, that's where the largest gap is. It has data to be able to create something that is similar to what is already out in the world, but it's lacking the critical thinking and the relationships to continuously update and look a little bit more into the future. So I think that that's what the gap is. It's like if you're using it for brainstorming, ideating, thinking through future strategy, you're consistently disappointed because it's going to give you what has already worked and what is the middle ground average in before. So I think that's what it is. There's a lot to fix. There's always a lot to fix. And I've had some teams where we commit to timing ourselves on the time that we spend to fix what a generative AI has put out, so that we have something to compare it to. How much time would it have taken us to do it just from scratch? I think that, you know, zooming out and up a level, it's important to do performance reviews on your AI tools the same way you would do performance reviews for your human employees. And I think that however you can think about measuring the things that matter and measuring that gap, that'll become just important to decision making the more and more AI you pull into your work.
Well, I feel like I have a bunch of more questions, but I'm happy to open the floor. Si alguien quiere preguntar algo, me levantan la mano.
We got a real fast hand over here. It was like,
Aquí,
yes, I have a
acá-
question.
Acá me echan la mano con un mic, jovenazos. Aquí abajito. Arturo. Sí, don Arturo.
Okay, thanks for your time. In some part of your presentation, you talk about digital wallet agent. How do you see the future of this part? I read something about the future market in China. It's exponential. It's the parallel market where combine the agents with blockchain, where we have two kinds of tokens. Tokens by traceability and tokens for the use of the platform. What do you see this future here for the Mexican people, and what variants we can start to use in this moment?
Yeah, I think that for what might happen in Mexico, it's a little. I'm less of an expert on what might happen in Mexico, so I'll talk about what's happening in China, just given the trends that are happening there, which is that what's happening in China with digital currency and digital wallets is very interesting because they effectively took everything that happened in cryptocurrency and the permissionless web, copied, pasted it, and then made it permissioned, right? So what's wonderful is now you have all of the seamlessness of transactions, and anyone inside of this network, super easy. You also are able to see businesses that are saying, if you leave me a review, I'll give you some amount of digital currency in my particular currency to be able to then use. So I think that in a place like China where you're able to say there's a ECNY, like there's an EUN that's issued from the government and there's a regulated version of that, it's only going to keep getting better. And the app ecosystem, the mini app ecosystem where businesses are very digitally enabled, and even if you're in the middle of somewhere quite rural, you're still able to use WeChat or Alipay, that infrastructure is going to keep scaling and going up. I think that in somewhere like the United States, where there's a lot of regulatory and there's a lot of friction in terms of adopting a true digital currency, the example that I think of often a little bit more is Starbucks, right? So Starbucks gift cards, in some ways, are digital wallets. Starbucks has more money in their gift cards than some small countries do in their entire treasuries. So when you are in a country that's highly regulated and probably will take a long time to adopt an official government digital currency, you end up with more corporate markets that are, you can't use a Starbucks gift card at Pete's Coffee, right? They would just be like, nah, thanks, we don't accept that here. So it really takes a regulated authority that usually issues currency for that to grow in the same way that it has in China. I think in terms of Mexico, the conditions that I would look at are, what is the regulatory state? How comfortable are people with app ecosystems and connectivity? And then I think that the third factor that I would look at is something like what happened in Kenya with M-Pesa, where is this actually a culture that's ready to move on from the existing financial infrastructure? Part of why I think e-currency or digital wallets is harder to adopt in the United States is because people are comfortable with credit cards. It's pretty easy to just swipe and walk away. Whereas in China and in Kenya and M-Pesa, you got to leapfrog the entire credit card system by just using mobile tap to pay. So in terms of digital wallets and the near-term results, I think that it depends on regulation and culture. But when we get to tractors and cars and physical AI, those objects or those agents have to use digital wallets because they are not, they don't pass KYC laws. Like a tractor will not pass a KYC law and therefore it cannot have a bank account. What happens when someone can't have a bank account? They use digital wallets. So I think that that's what I'm seeing there is that from the technological infrastructure side of Web3, it is actually mature enough to be adopted by the JP Morgans, the Chinas, the larger regulated bodies of the world. But it may take physical AI to really push into adoption for countries that already have a stable and fast and reliable payment system. I mean, I think that agents with digital wallets are much faster scale processes than registers with cash agents, right? Because you might have an agent okay 100 transactions at the same time. They don't have to click yes and yes and yes and yes, right? So I think that what's interesting, at least in the States with fintech, if we look at Plaid and we look at Stripe and all of these payment processors that made things possible digitally, what they're now able to allow linking between, Plaid for example, linking between different bank accounts, if you allow this like waterfall effect to happen of agent one says, okay, yes, go through with 100 transactions, each of those 100 transactions are an agent that then allow another 100 transactions to go through, you start to see exponential number of transactions go through. So one, the transaction fees for that are going to be crazy. Two, I think that we may see something that's more like a permissioned blockchain or a ledger rather than a permissionless one, just because of block size, transaction fees for anything that has a waterfall effect. So I think we'll see, but bigger scale for sure.
Thank you. In other scenario, I listen people from the legal department. They have the expectative that for the year 28, start the regulatory about the facilities and the legal process. I have blockchain and the regular process in the other business. Web3 is the new future for Mexico. By this reason, I make this question. Thank for your time.
Thank you so much. I'll look out for 2028. That's really fascinating. Thank you.
I think the Mexican case is, I'm going to keep it in English, just the Mexican case, in not just Mexico, Latin America, the thing that makes it work seamlessly in China is government, right? Everybody agrees. Well, I don't know if everybody agrees, but in China they all comply. In Latin American countries, the traceability of transactions is not as clear, and I don't know if everyone agrees that they should be clear. I think that's one of the biggest barriers, not only for Mexico, for Latin countries, and expanded to the U.S. as well. That's why regulation is. They haven't been as open because they take so much care of security of their info, and like in places like China, the info is out there. All right. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Allá tenemos unas jóvenes que están muy deseosos de hacer una pregunta. Ricardo.
Hi, I'm Eduardo. I'm software engineering student. I previously worked on law, and now I'm working on logistics. My question is, how can I be unreplaceable at this new era? Because every CEO is like saying, no, IT department is not necessary anymore. So how can I use AI for learning more and not being replaced by AI?
Get good at one thing that you just really like to do. I think that even basically every single field has some form of an edge case that no one is that good at. And if it turns out that you really like to do something that only one person likes to do, it's possible that it'll become useful. For example, in hardware, the thing that I would recommend people to learn would be C++, because GPT is much better at Python than C++. But that's not because it's better, it's because people are not that good at C++. And so, you have to find the things that you like to do, and become really good at them. I think it's probably about time. That if you're interested in vision, or you're interested in machines, or you're interested in whatever it is that is makes you excited, that becoming an expert or top of your field in just that niche thing might serve you better than trying to compete with whatever the next trend is.
I think maybe I would add to that is that the edge case thing is that if there's not a lot of data that already exists, there's probably not something that the AI can do. And so being able to find the niches where there isn't a lot of data that's been collected already and being able to fill that gap seems really valuable. I also think being able to come up with new ideas based on that expertise will also be really invaluable, because the ideas that AI can come up with are limited by what already exists, and it sort of recycles what it can do already.
And I will load up by saying, I would change my mindset. I wouldn't be defending my job. I would be doing things that make me irreplaceable. It's not a defense position. It's pull or push, right? You want to make them have to pull you. It's all about a mindset. It's not defense. It's just, I'm doing all I can to learn as much as I can and get in all the tools that I can. You're so lucky to have me. And I don't think it's just IT departments. I think it's every place on the company should be doing that. Not worrying about something is not going to solve it. Worrying about having or not a job is not going to solve you keeping the job or not. If you work in a company that is just cutting costs and replacing people, the company might not even survive. So why would you be so worried to stay there? So I'm not an expert on technicalities like that, but I think it's more a mindset thing. Change your mindset. You're young. See what other abilities do you have, and work on those more human things, not worrying about so much as the technical stuff, but critical thinking, interpersonal relationships, networking effects. That's what I'll do. That's a little bit of my take. Somebody else? Otra, aquí.
Hi guys, my name is Paloma and I really want to congratulate you first for your talks, and they are being amazing. The three of you have been amazing today, and the impact that you are creating in each one of us is huge, trust me. So the question is, my company is a SaaS company, and we are through AI and data-driven transformation, like very, very aggressive. But the thing is that our processes, our critical processes, are not fully defined yet. So what would be the best strategy that we should take to implement agentic AI while we don't want to implement or reinforce chaos, or we don't want to document flawless processes, we don't want to reinforce what it doesn't work? That's the first question. And how would be the best way to balance the AI-driven transformation while we stabilize the processes?
I think that it's interesting. It's with generative, it was like you have to adopt new things. I think with agentic, there's a lot of like you got to make sure the old things are fixed before you bring in the new things. And so I think it goes back to like solid management philosophy. You know, like it's not a great answer because everyone's like, oh, I thought this thing would come in and fix everything, and you're like, yeah, but do you really want to put new carpets on your floor before you fix the foundation of your house? You know, like that base layer maybe matters a little bit more. So I think that practically, what I would do is data is really important, not just for powering your AI models, but actually understanding like where can we reset to a place that really worked well and where things went wrong. And so I think it is making sure that there's a very tight collaboration between, you know, you may have your organization set up differently, but how I would think about it is the office of the CTO with the IT department, with the human resources manager, with your strategy. And very rarely, I think, does the CTO's office actually talk and hang out with the chief people officer office. Like those two are really different or organization silos usually, but bring those two together and just talk through like, what do we need in terms of our people and our human resource management needs versus what do we need from our technology needs? How do we pair any new agent that we're bringing in the same way that we would pair someone who's a new hire with someone who's been around for a long time? I think what happens there is you are able to make sure that the technology is being implemented in a way that really serves the people instead of the other way around. So it's not like groundbreaking new stuff. I think it's like, it's just hard work, and it's sort of that moment of it's time to clean house and you got to do it before the new stuff comes in. And so if anything, it's a nice forcing function to say it's finally time. Like we have to invest the money now before we do any investments into Agentic. So I think different approaches, very specific for each organization, but that's where I would start is a weekly or monthly or however daily, even if it makes sense, but a drumbeat between CTO and IT with human resources and strategy, and those teams should really become a lot closer.
Got something to add to
Yeah,
that?
I do. I think more as an experimentalist, and so if you have to, I think of agents as things that are going to be good at a set of things that I give it, and also need to. I wish I had talked about this in the talk, but if you want your agent to do something very specific, you have to be mindful of the information that you give it, which means you have to think about the agent as an experiment that you're running. And so if you are idealizing your solution, which is what is the best solution to this problem, whatever your problem is, you have to think about what would your process be for teaching a person? Like, what would you give a person to do to make them good at that task? What would you like? So, what would be your sort of criterion of evaluating whether or not it's good at that task? So, thinking somewhat experimentally about sort of what is your problem, what do you know, what don't you know, and what holes would you like to fill? Again, with the smallest possible problem or version of that problem is, I think, the way to view something that has already been trained to work or make actions, and then help it be better. That statement also gives you a line for evaluating whether or not you have succeeded or failed. So if your metric is money, then there's a very easy metric about did it make any money. But if you have an easier metric, which is time, right? Let's say that the amount of time that you want to take to hire a person you want to minimize, then you have to set up an experiment of like, well, how many conditions are there? How many observations can you make? And then how do you minimize the amount of time that it takes to get a person from applying to the job to being hired? And these are things that you can check up on over time and that you can also simulate over time. So that would be thinking somewhat about like agents as a form of an experiment that you can run and that you can check on the progress of. And that the progress wouldn't be the big goal of the company, but like very specific thinking of it as like a thing that can do two things really well, or a thing that can do three things really well. Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
But
What if we want to like quantifically jumpstart to having an agent and never ever have touched an AI?
come again?
The question is, what if we want to directly get into having an agent and not have to touch anything about AI? Is that what?
You never had before touch AI? All right. Just go directly to Agentic.
If you haven't already.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think my take on it is that like agentic has been a really great marketing term, but I think that we actually have interacted with agents for much, much, much longer than we've interacted with generative. Like Alexa is an agent, or whatever her name is, Alexa or Cortana or whichever one. Like
Here's Alexa, Siri, and
Siri,
all
okay.
of them.
Like I've turned all of them off because I don't want to talk to them ever. But so I forgot her name is how much I have a relationship with it. But the Siri or Alexa is able to purchase something for you. I think that that's what an agent has already done. If you've ever used a travel booking site or a travel agent, literally a travel agent that's where the name I think comes from in culture. So in my opinion, like if this then that has been agents for already a very long time. And so in many ways, you're able to, we have been interacting with agents before agentic AI has become a thing. It's perhaps just that this moment we now have the surrounding digital infrastructure that they can do way more. And I think that the decision is, are you in a place where you want to build a really custom agent so that it can do exactly what you want it to do? And in that case, I will leave that question to you, how you build an agent from scratch. I actually don't know. But I also think that there is a scenario where if you are very sharp on, this is what I want my agent to do, I think what's interesting is actually putting that out into the world and saying, like, this is what I want this agent to do. I wonder how many other people would also want their agent to do exactly this. And now you are a CEO of a company that can raise money to hire someone who knows how to build an agent to do exactly those things. But I do think that that first step is like, what do I actually want it to do so that I can look for it? And then in terms of building one,
It's complicated.
And
Here?
before we jump out, I would like to add to that question is, I agree it's complicated, but it takes just to sit down for a couple hours, start doing generative AI and start asking it, and trying to find a really small, little bitty problem that you would like the agent to solve, right? Not a big task, not huge things, but just one thing. And from then, try to build on top of that. That's what at least that's what I did.
Right. The one thing I'll add is that lots of work has already been done. And so if your problem is within the finished space of things that people have already approached, then go with something that has already been built. It's complicated is like building your own agent for your own thing, for your own unique thing, training it from scratch is like it has its errors.
but I also think that, like, you know, it used to be hard to build a website, or it used to be hard to build an app. It used to be hard to make, it's still hard to make a logo that really is beautiful. So I think that hopefully one day, like, I want to build an agent is basically looking up, like, Agentic Design Studio, and then having someone come.
Somebody here. Sorry. No, sorry.
No worries.
They have to go first. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I would like to ask something around from the governance and the strategy perspective. What about the data, the quality of data? We are assuming that we have data in right conditions before to use an agentic or agent. So the question is, if a CIO might ask, what would be the criteria to use an agent or design an agent? What would be the answer for those kind of people when we are challenged by a CEO? What would be the answer, right? This is my questions. What would be the criteria before use an agent inside in the organization?
I mean, my tongue-in-cheek answer is, how big is your data cleaning budget, right? It's because in some ways that's a service, and it's in the best interest of perhaps like Scale AI. It's in the best interest of whoever's providing that service to keep doing that service for you for as long as you're going to be using that agent to take in new data, clean new data, put it into the model. But I think that it's a it depends question, which I'll throw it over to you for a more technical answer here, is that if you don't have a lot of data, you may not have a meaningful model or set of rules for this agent to be able to make good decisions. So it might be very erratic in the ways that and it might be very generic. It might not be worth the amount of time that it took. You could have just used something that's off the shelf. And so I think that it's a very much, it depends on the scenario that you want it to do. If it's not a very, I mean, even like, let's say you're running Swag Lab, even if you are just a merch company, putting in invoices, having suppliers, like even a company like that is already, you need a few years worth of how has this behaved and worked well for you to be able to totally turn it over. I think maybe the right question is, how much autonomy and how much guidance do you feel comfortable spending on this agent before you start to see results, where you are pairing that agent with a human employee that's consistently checking to make sure that it's doing the right thing? And it perhaps is a question more of like, when do you start to trust it, and what percentage of consistent results that you would expect from the agent feels like a good bar as an organization to say, okay, we're ready to actually allow this agent to go out in the world. If you're fine with like 80% of the time it makes good decisions, it's ready to deploy. Maybe you don't need that much data. If you're like, I need it to be 100% because we're a law firm and that's kind of our job, you may need several years, if not decades, of data to train it. But from like how much data, I think that's more.
It depends on what thing you're trying to do. There's this dude who wanted us to build an LLM for all of his things. So he wanted us to make an LLM clone of him. And I said, fine, pay me this much. And they said they didn't want to do it. And the issue is in what I call like bootstrapping. So in the example earlier today, we talked about if you wanted to train on your specific data, your data is kind of tiny in comparison to what the LLM's already been trained on. And so it's possible, I don't know what your problem is, it's possible that you might have a tiny bit of data, but you may need to bootstrap data, which means simulate data that is similar to the distribution of your data in order to get to a place where you can train something. And again, with things that are agentic or using reinforcement learning, you have to be very careful about what things you are asking it to do. I didn't get to show this earlier, but in teaching a robot how to walk, it turns out that accomplishing walking can be done in a lot of ways. There's like one way that I want it to do it, but there's 1,000 ways that it can be accomplished. And in that case, that means that sometimes you may get degenerative solutions. So that's just sort of to be mindful of that. But I think it's possible to, it depends on what your data is. If your data is how fast am I supposed to drive my car on a given highway, like these problems are something that you can deal with. If it's something that's more complicated or more like relational, related to how you relate to other people or whether or not to allow leniency or things like this, things that have more nuance, then it's possible that you'll need to either program those things, which we're back to classic algorithms, or you can train a model to do the job. But that, yeah. Cleaning data is like most of my PhD, which means that lots of data is just not good. It just like you can be the best data collector and it's still bad. And so, yeah, that's my thought.
I do wish that I could tell you like it's 10 gigabytes for every human employee that you have, right? Like, but we're just not there yet to be able to be like, this is what it is. But to give like a concrete like assignment that you can feel good about being like, we're gonna do this now. Before you get to amount, the data structure matters. So is there a structure for every data set that you are looking for? Is there a standard for how that data is being collected and then cleaned into? I think that that's actually, a lot of people miss that step to begin with. And so that feels like a very concrete answer of like, I don't know if it's 10 gigabytes or 100 terabytes, but the data structure for sure does need to exist.
And some problems don't need lots of data. It really depends on the problem, I think. Another thing is taking classes like data structures and algorithms mostly focuses on the algorithms. But if you have an understanding of what your data should look like what your matrix should be organized in, how balanced is your data set, how many sort of counterexamples do you have? Do you have positive controls, meaning this is, if I give it this input, this is exactly what it should have? Do you have negative controls? If I give it this input, this is what it should not do. These are things that are important for how to test, and sometimes you need lots of data, and sometimes you need like a really good classifier. Sometimes like the model that you choose is what determines like how well your output is, not necessarily the quality of data itself, although both matter.
Did that clear your question? Okay, can you get the mic, please? Thank you. The battery is low?
Hello?
Listo.
Okay. I have one in the back and then I'll
Okay,
come to
okay.
you.
That one is
pretty much
All right.
straightforward and high-risk AI applications, models. I mean, autonomous weapons, deep fakes. So from your perspective, what would it be a mechanism to control that? Governance from an organizational perspective, we have governance, but also when you're talking about cross regions, it's regulations. It's, if you think about warfare and cybersecurity stuff, a lot of criminals using a lot of deepfakes and stuff. So from your perspective, what would be a good approach to start looking at that from a corporate perspective? I don't want to step into politics and all the stuff, but what would be your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that one of the scariest conversations I've ever had about just AI in general, not just generative or agentic, was somebody who was working on a kill switch for weaponry. How do you design an agent to handle the kill switch for a military bomb? And I was just like, I don't really want this project to even be considered, because no matter what your answer is, the risk is so huge. And so I think that this question sort of falls into this category of Al Roth is a 2012 Nobel winner, and I tend to take his perspective on it, which is that there are markets that are called repugnant markets. And that market includes things that are very unsavory, like child pornography, but also things that are very useful, like organs. So how do you decide how to control and regulate the market of kidneys? And the answer is that you don't. To regulate the market of organs would result in people harvesting organs more and more and more. His reaction to that, because donating kidneys is a very important thing to be able to do, was to create an algorithm for how to prioritize who gets kidney donations and how to make it so that if one kidney is donated, that triggers many, many, many different kidneys to then be donated because one action is done, right? So mathematically optimizing for, well, if you have a market for kidney donation, for kidneys selling, oh my God, there'd be a lot of bad things for it, but to actually create the right set of incentives so that instead of just one kidney going to one person, one kidney transfer results in 94 people resulting and having new organs is a much better outcome than allowing a market to decide it. So that's all to say that I think it's a combination of regulatory, absolutely. I think that will be a really long and difficult challenge, right? I would take social media as not even to deepfakes, but just social media usage and advertising in general and gambling as one that's difficult to control. So regulation definitely needs to be involved. But I think that there is also a responsibility from a societal standpoint to get better at recognizing, not looking at a picture and being like, there are 6 fingers and the wrinkle here is a little bit strange. It's a little bit more of a, hey, how do we gauge our reactions to things that we see online? And how do we understand how quickly or when we need to address something, right? So I don't know how often you check your spam. I love checking my spam inbox because once in a while you get an email from a Nigerian prince who's like, I'm gonna offer you $100 million if you do this. And it's kind of interesting to see how has that changed over time. I think deepfakes will fall into that same category of how has this medium really changed over time and how do we counter-adapt the instinct to know something is off here, let me try and fix it. I do think that there are things that are very real considerations, like voice authentication for you get a call and you're like, please, I think that really truly is problematic. But I do believe in one, regulation has a role to play, absolutely. And then 2, the counterculture of how we react as a society is really important to talk about and to have these conversations because it won't be just down to regulation. But I think repugnant markets is actually a really interesting case example of you want to solve the problem without necessarily imposing regulation or just a free market solution towards it.
You have one right there.
Yes, thank you. Luis Martinez from Deloitte. 2-3 months ago, for a client, we were building an architecture based on agents. And one of the things that I realized is that it's a nightmare to map all the relationships that you expect to have different agents, right, working together. So when I was in these discussions with the team, we were wondering, the point of having agents is to have an agency, right, to take decisions by themselves. And in an enterprise, in a company, the CEO is not defining every single activity that all their employees are performing every day. So what's your perspective on delegating the decisions of agents of, I don't know, defining other agents, this structure? Because if we as humans take this ownership, this role of defining every single thing, right, it's going to be impossible in a couple of years to define all the relationships that we expect to, all these agents will have. So what are your thoughts on this perspective?
Okay, so one, back to this person's question, there's a whole community on this working on it called AI alignment. They do a bunch of stuff. It's very interesting. It's very difficult to do. So an example would be if you wanted your LLM to not help people make bombs, then you would delete the bomb network. You would trace all of the ways that it can make bombs and delete the bomb network. But it turns out that deleting the bomb network might also delete knowledge of physics. So it's like, so balancing some of these things are important, which gets me over to your question, which is simulation. So I didn't get to show some of the simulation things, but I think it's important to be able to run simulations and to see how things work out and to have scores, like value scores, for the way things turn out, whether or not it turns out to be degenerate or whether it turns out to be very successful, and whether or not that also, the successful version maps onto reality. Because simulation you can run thousands of times in hundreds of worlds, and you don't have to worry about as much as things breaking as often. But if you have some form of a starting point, I think that makes it easier to simulate, being a sort of an adversarial attacker, or simulate the connection between relationships that can give you probability distributions on how something can work, or what are the possible ways that it can go wrong. And it can come up, like simulating can come up with more solutions than you could think up, and can test more edge cases than you can think up. And you can take maybe the top 10 or top 100 of how things can or should be connected and use that as the approach. So AI alignment, I think you would find it very interesting. It has tons of problems that people are actively trying to solve, and part of that solving is using simulations.
I think the other tactic that somebody's going to be upset about this. From the perspective of Deloitte and companies that I think are in the business of providing this kind of service repeatedly to multiple clients, I don't think that it will happen now. So this isn't a right now solution. I think this may take a few years to settle and evolve, but in the same way that management consultancies come in and will say, let's take a look at your org chart, and we've gotten to the traditional pyramid, org chart, flat hierarchy, holacracy, like all of the different ways that organizations are shaped and relationships are shaped. I think that agentic structures will also start to take on patterns. I don't know that it will also be a pyramid or a flat, or I think it'll be much, I think fractal is going to happen. Like I'm very excited about a fractal org chart that has agents inside of it. And then between organizations as well, like that will have a different architecture. So I think that there will be a few patterns of standard shapes that will exist into the future. And I would say that perhaps like trying to map all of the different relationships is, if you could do it, that's amazing, but perhaps it is a bit of simulation of which ones are the ones that work the best, and not to force the organization into an agentic infrastructure, but to actually say like, hey, what's reasonable is this shape of hierarchy for your agents and your human operators with these agents. Perhaps let's just try this shape to start out with. If we need to evolve it, we can evolve it. But I would look at it in like 5-10 years. You come into a company and on the initial consult is sort of like, are you at this shape? Are you at this shape? Or are you at this shape? We'll customize a few things. But generally organizations like yourself tend to be, this shape. And I kind of see that pattern of what happened in management consulting also happening in agentic management as well. So it'll take a few years to get there, but I would be on the lookout for what patterns might start to exist.
There's a field for that also, such as graph neural networks, that's their whole thing. So we have to remember that lots of the computer science community has been trying to solve many of these problems, and we just have renamed them. And so
that's what management consultants do.
Yeah, and so I think that also looking at things like graph neural networks can help you understand the relationships between things, because this is an entire field of trying to understand how things relate to other things. So yeah.
Breve, porfa, porque ya nos pasamos 2 veces 5 minutos. Cuéntanos. Yeah. Let's try to keep it brief because we're already over.
That's going to be quick. So I'm a robotics student, and I'm obsessed with the idea of AI consciousness. I think it is one of the most important issues of our time. And for example, I think, for example, for an agentic AI that sees the world through sensors, actuators, for example, how it moves, whether it's wheels, walking, whatever, and it also has data, the same way we understand the world. So we understand the world through data, what our eyes and ears see. And basically, if we could train like an AI agent as a child, like similar to a child, to understand the world, to learn, could it eventually consciousness emerge from that? For example, a lot of people say, no, AI can't be conscious, robots can't be conscious. But if it reaches a point where it looks like consciousness, sounds like consciousness, acts like consciousness, it gets really, really close, why wouldn't it be consciousness? Like, how could that be, like from the point of neuroscience and also like that.
We say something brief. It's gonna be.
I'll keep it brief. I think that the understanding of consciousness is as diverse as the understanding of intelligence, and that secondarily we have issues with humans not feeling that other humans are conscious and treating them as such. And so if we had an understanding of how to not treat people as if they weren't conscious. So here's the thing. For the person at Google who believed that the LLM was conscious, some part of that is just language bias. Because I have experienced that when people cannot speak to you in their preferred language, they don't treat you the same. And so we already have the issue of just connecting with people on a person level, or a dog on a person level, that it would be very difficult to describe or ascribe consciousness to another thing. And we've seen many examples of who we decide to make a slave class and who we decide not to. So it's a complicated thing, not very well defined.
Pues bueno, no queda más que agradecerles. Shuya, Javier, thank you so much for your input today. I think it's been delightful for every one of us being here and learning so much with you guys. Hope to see you back soon in Mexico. You know, this is your house. We, Descúbrete and myself, thank you so much for being here.